Well, good morning, everybody. Here's a quick layout of today's video. I'm going to cover a lot of satellite and radar imagery at the beginning today because a lot of very interesting things happened yesterday and in the overnight hours. We're going to walk through our normal cadence of images that I've been showing you for the last 5 to 6 days just to see how things are evolving here in the near term with both precipitation and temperature. We're going to walk through the hurricane stuff, and then at the very end I have some new long-range things to discuss, primarily centered around the thought that this El Nino is going to start to really dominate the pattern going forward. So let's get into it. Yesterday's satellite data here show us the large complex of storms that started off here in parts of Wisconsin and northern Illinois, but moved across parts of Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, and over Lake Erie. And some of these storms produced very strong straight line winds. Some of them are quite powerful over Lake Michigan and then again over Lake Erie, but along the way did quite a bit of damage. But as the sun was setting here, you can see some of the individual thunderstorm clusters that did pop up late in the day, like these here on the Illinois, Missouri, Iowa border. We can see a few throughout the southeast, but then take a look at this series of storms that popped here from Nebraska all the way up to Manitoba. In fact, this one had a history of producing some very, very large hail. West of that, we have this kind of monsoonal surge that's still tucked within the ridge. I'm going to show you in a moment what happened in Arizona last night. And then, of course, to the north, you can see some of the wildfire smoke. So we're going to visit that again, too. Okay, severe storm reports from yesterday. 202 reports so far are in. And again, the primary event was this one right in through here, which is actually going to set up much of the kind of the northeast for severe risk again today. So this is the third day of that shortwave that produced the severe storms here first, second there, and finally third over in this region. If we take a look at just a couple of individual radars, though, I wanted to take you right here to the very center of the country. We're in Nebraska because there was a couple of interesting things that kind of happened. So that's the whole animation I want you to see. But take a look at this boundary right in through here. You can actually see it really well in the clear air. And it's along that boundary that we had some pretty large storms just pop. See them just running up. This is where the air is forced to rise. And some of those bigger storms that kind of came up here. But then what was interesting was that late in the night as the sun set and the inversion built in, we did have some issues with the radar beam in a few different places while bigger storms moved out of Colorado into Kansas. But I found it kind of interesting that overnight that inversion trapped the beam, probably caused some ducting, and we can just now see these bright echoes in through here. These are all wind turbines. So we're just clipping the tops of those turbines. That's not the speckled stuff that you just saw like this, but all of this. These are all wind turbines throughout parts of Iowa. Really kind of interesting to pick up on that. Then we come here, and this is down in Arizona. Now, the storms that were in Arizona were quite interesting because of the outflow they produced. See this here? And the storms that you see down here in southeastern Arizona, and this outflow that they kick off. Now, just watch this complex of storms. I'm just going to click play, and I want you to watch how quickly they go from here to here. Ready? There they go. And the outflow raced so quickly across that area that I imagine, and I'm hoping to get some confirmation later this morning, that we're going to see reports of a big haboob out of this, a big dust storm out of this coming through parts of Arizona. We'll see if that shows up. Maybe some folks took some pictures of the National Weather Service comments on it. And then I've got one last one to show you here. And that is one from the western United States, because we did see yesterday a series of fires from parts of Oregon, this one here in Idaho, and a couple here in Montana. Just look at the smoke plumes that these put out later in the day. And the concern is growing, as I mentioned the last couple of days here, for the western United States and what it's going to mean in terms of just seeing a lot more wildfire activity as we move toward the busiest time of year for that. But before I go any further, let's just do this. Let's go look at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. And this is what I've got for you. So 3 days worth. Here's the numbers looking around the country. Now, this morning we were still watching storms that were continuing right here along this boundary. So moving out of Minnesota into Wisconsin, but still stretching down here, some active storms in parts of Iowa. And as we look at the forecast for today, we're going to keep an eye on the upper Midwest, but also watch here along in New England. This will continue our streak of slight risk days. We even have another one tomorrow. And I'm very concerned about the risk of strong straight line wind damage, again, hitting parts of Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. This is going to have to watch this area carefully. And we're going to continue to see that same frontal boundary as we get into the day 3 outlook on the 29th, kind of pressing into this area. And I'm sure that the Storm Prediction Center will upgrade several of these spots to a slight risk as well. So let's go ahead and have a look at the high res NAM, the 6Z run. And we're going to pick this up at 7 a.m. So there's the complex of storms we watched here. The remnants of what was coming out of Michigan and Lake Erie is still here in parts of New England. And we're going to watch later today for storms to really ride again here over the ridge, coming out of the Four Corner states, isolated up into parts of Wyoming and Montana. And you'll see the storms here later on this afternoon, stretching from the Ohio River Valley all the way here through parts of New England. And as we keep an eye on these storms in the overnight hours, these are the ones I'm most concerned about of all of them across the country, at least given the latest information I've got, because there is the potential for those storms to kind of run right over the top of the overnight inversion layer at the surface, the boundary layer, and may just propagate right out of Minnesota through Wisconsin, Iowa, into Illinois. And the models are just kind of indicating that there could be some, it could be a squall line, could be potentially a bow echo that shows up here. So I'm going to watch that carefully. This, again, would be between Thursday and Friday. We then play that out through the day on Friday, and we just see more storms rolling through the same areas here. So you can kind of just see that whole, region. In fact, if we just play out the next 7 days, we still have that. So not a whole lot's changed overall. So this is our stormiest corridor, right in through here. And we're very dry to the south of it, very dry in the west, very hot down south as well. So just keep an eye out on this overall corridor for the risk of strong to severe storms. One change that did happen is the models are backing off on the precip. Now that the lead wave has gone through here on what's happening north of Highway 16, that's been a constant discussion this week. And you can see that a bit better if I show you the probability of getting at least an inch of rainfall in the next 10 days. So while the probabilities have remained high in through this area into New England and then here in the mountains, local flooding very possible. We saw it change by dropping through this corridor and increasing down here in Florida and along the coastal parts of Georgia, North and South Carolina up toward Virginia. So those are some of the areas that have started to see an increase in precipitation, primarily due to better flow coming into this off of the east, out of the east to the east coast. Drier side of things, this is the probability of getting less than half of an inch. And again, we stay pretty dry throughout the west, although big storms in the mountains, okay? But then you get into New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, stretching all the way over to Mississippi, Alabama. This particular region has been underneath that ridge and has been forecast dry and stays that way. And we then see the best chance of getting less than 1/10 of an inch. And it's mostly centered around parts of Texas and Oklahoma, southern Kansas, but stretches again over to parts of Mississippi. Then the west, along the coast here in California, Oregon, and Washington up to Columbia Basin, the I-5 corridor here does look to be quite dry in this particular pattern. Now, the overall pattern I'm talking about is this. You go out 5 days from now, and we get flow that's doing something like that. And you've seen me draw that arrow 100 times. What happens is, as we begin the month of August, the model's been very consistent with really backing the ridge up to the west, but keeping it open down here across the south. So what this does is this pushes heat west, but also keeps it in place down here across the south. Now, what will we get on the northern side of this? It still indicates storms. We're still expecting storms almost everywhere that I'm kind of drawing these lines coming through here. That's going to be our active corridor. If we just play this out there to the 5th, 6th, and 7th of August, this is a very, I hate to say it, but a very normal summer flow pattern. So you get ridge riders, you get heat south, you get a stormy pattern through here, and that seems to be the way the beginning of the month is shaping up. So I'm not really surprised when I saw the newest updates here from both the CPC and the European model. You can also see that the GFS is honed in on that same area for risk of above average precip. It's here and here, and we can also see that very clearly in the European, and it's the same location that we've got here from the CPC. So I very much agree with what they've got here as far as the week 2 pattern, given that I don't see any massive disruptions to it. Nothing coming through to really wipe this pattern out. Nothing out of the tropics. It's very much an early August pattern. So what about the temperatures? Because today we do have the excessive heat watches and warnings and advisories covering a very large area starting in the central United States to the Ohio Valley and then into parts of New England. We have the red flag warnings west and the heat also down here in Southern California into Arizona as well. And having a look at those temperatures, let's blow that up. This is what I'm expecting today. So this is just another day of excessive heat here in this section of the country: Nebraska, Iowa, parts of Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, and then it is hot south of that as well. If we play forward from Thursday into Friday, you can now start to see the front that's coming through, but another very hot day here and also throughout much of New England. It just stays hot in the southwest and south during this time frame. You get into Saturday, you can see the front continuing to sag here, but how far does it make it? It doesn't really clear Kansas, Missouri, southern Illinois. So on Sunday, as that propagates east, you start to see the heat rebuilding in this area. A lot of triple-digit heat coming back to this spot Sunday into Monday and Tuesday. There's Tuesday's temperatures again, very, very hot during this time frame. And let's go ahead and take this out a full week to next Wednesday. So this is the area we've talked about multiple times, just keeping the heat on. And parts of Missouri have been absolutely hammered with drought this year. So to see the excessive heat coming on, this is going to continue to degrade the quality of the crop in Missouri and surrounding areas through here. So we're going to watch that carefully. The temperature risks going into week 2. So this is the 3rd through the 9th. We're going to have to watch just, again, the south, keeping the heat on for quite some time. We've now started to see the models increase the risk of excessive heat here for that August 3rd through August 9th time frame. Here's what the latest update from the European ensemble is. This is a 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. We just played that out there to day 10. The cooling through here is from thunderstorm activity. All right, the cooling here is probably because of the cooler water that's off the west coast. The heat stays under the ridge that's in this area. It's cooler in New England by this time frame as well. This is through the first 5 days of August. Second 5 days of August, we just see the models backing off on the risk of heat. It's still going to be hot. It's early August, but the models have cooled this region down going into this time frame. Now, big questions I have, and this is where we start to discuss the longer range, is are the tropics going to continue to keep active? We just saw the National Hurricane Center up this in the overnight. This is only through the 2 a.m. update. I'm recording a bit too early for the 8 a.m. update here along the East Coast. But they've got 40% chance of tropical cyclone formation. And just looking out there at the ensembles, we are seeing the Bermuda High sitting right here. It's not quite in its normal position. If this were a bit farther to the east, we'd be talking about this potential system being one that could be problematic for the East Coast. So the Bermuda High is still displaced. See it? But current clusters, according to the European ensemble, are developing a system here and rolling it a bit farther to the north. Nothing yet in the Gulf of Mexico, despite the incredibly warm ocean temperatures there. So we're going to watch for that. And I wanted to bring you back to an animation I showed you earlier in the week or last week. It's a 30-day animation of ocean temperatures. And we've been discussing the flip here because of the high pressure that sat over this part of the Atlantic that brought in this very, very warm ocean temperature here. Some places are up to 10 degrees Celsius above average. But during this whole time, the Atlantic has stayed hot. El Nino continues to develop, but the Pacific meridional mode keeps eroding. And at the very end of this animation, notice the warmer water overtaking. Look, it'll start over. See how cool it was here? You're going to watch that warmer water overtake much of the Gulf of Alaska in the month of July. And I think this is really starting to influence where the ridge position is going to be across the country. I still do not know what the water here is going to do to the lower atmosphere sensible heating and therefore the position of the ridge. I don't know. But I do know that this developing El Nino and the erosion of the Pacific meridional mode is contributing, I think, to the development of an important piece of our late summer, fall and winter jet stream pattern. We call it the subtropical jet. So let's go have a look at it. First of all, if we just go over to my favorite site, Tropical Tidbits, I do want to show you that those ocean temperatures just continue to climb right there in the central equatorial Pacific. And another point to make here is, if you just watch, let's let this reset. It's going to go back here in just a few moments. Actually, let me refresh it. There we go, back to May. This is ocean depth. This here would be South America, and this would be over by Indonesia and Australia. There is still plenty of warm water, much warmer than average, that is going to surface in this region, meaning that this El Nino will continue to show up if the trade winds behave the way we expect them to when there's an El Nino. And so that's what brings me here. The MJO, it appears, over the next couple of weeks begins to open up into the Pacific Ocean and has a reflection here over Africa and the Indian Ocean. That is where I would expect the MJO to be if there was an El Nino kind of brewing. We can also go back and just notice that these westerly wind bursts, as denoted by the warmer colors, they're continuing in this area to show up, and that's going to influence the development of the subtropical jet. Now, I went back and looked so far in the month of July, And there are some hints of it beginning to show up here and here. Now, what we're looking for here is this stronger upper level wind that comes out of the tropics and subtropics and then runs right into the west coast of the United States. If that happens, it ends up looking something like this. See it? Now, it may look like a very subtle feature, but that feature, as we play into the month of August, will actually be well, you follow it, and that's where the wetter weather will be. I mean, that's the main story. Just keep an eye on it, and that's where the wetter conditions will be. And that's what I've got. That is a very El Nino look to the start of August. And thinking about that, I want to go back and I want to reconstruct for you. We've done this a few times. Every August that's had a developing El Nino. And what you end up getting out of it, I put the years in here, is that the precipitation anomalies looked something like this. All right? There you go. We were drier across the south into the mid-Atlantic. And we were wetter here and much wetter in parts of the west and near normal for a big section of the west. So the only thing I would tell you about this is that the current movement would suggest that this area will likely be one of the wetter years when you look historically. In other words, I don't think we're going to expect to just go dry here, nor do I expect it to be dry in New England. And then the wild card, as always, for this area is, do we end up having a tropical system that comes through and could wipe out any sort of a dry forecast? Now, what I want to do from here is I want to go back and I want to add on the next month. So let's go to September. Let's not add it on, let's just go to it. Because in September, what you notice is this. We are wetter than average throughout much of the west, active storms, but then this corridor on through here and here shows up much wetter, and Texas does as well. And it seems to be only the east that shows up drier. Now again, big question marks here. Because of this year's displacement of the Bermuda High, could we get a system that clips the east? Absolutely. Given the warm water that's in the Gulf, yeah, there could be, in the peak of hurricane season, which of course is September, more activity here that could throw this out the door. But we might as well go back and have a quick look at the next month, which would be October. And as we start thinking about October being a big harvest month, there is concern of wetter conditions in through this area. We tend to be starting a drier stretch for the start of the wet season in the Pacific Northwest, but very wet in through here. So I'm just looking historically. This is just an analog approach to trying to understand August, September, and October, and I wanted to provide that because tomorrow I want you to go to the CPC, and what they're going to do is, middle of the day, they're going to update their new week 3, week 4 outlook, which is the current one made last week as shown here. Don't forget, when you go to this website, if you want to see any of our government's long-range forecasts, you can either hover over, the 3-month forecast, or you can actually click on it and go actually look at the individual time frames for temperature and precipitation. So go have a look at this stuff. It's a valuable resource. Remember, tomorrow I'm not going to produce a video. I'll look forward to catching up with you next week. So have a good rest of your week. Thanks.